All right, well, welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we examine and discuss Critical Role episodes, plot lines, and characters through the lens of sacred reading practices. This particular episode is going to be about Campaign 1, Episode 1, starting off, and it's going to be the Part 1. And joining me today is Alyssa, and she is a librarian, and so I'm super excited to have her special take on these episodes and the stuff going on. So please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And as always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well. So comment, like, and subscribe below. Ready? All right, let's dive in. So as we open this podcast episode, Vox Machina is just being introduced. And so we're going to take a little bit of time talking about their background and how the show started in the first place to give you a good foundation of what's been going on. So the original cast of Critical Role had been playing a Pathfinder campaign together for 2 years before they converted their home game into a live streamed homebrewed 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons web series. In 2015, they were approached by Felicia Day to stream their campaign live on the Geek and Sundry Twitch channel. And it was on March 12th, 2015 that they began streaming their first live episode, Arrival at Kraghammer. But what happened to the characters prior to this episode? So we are introduced to Grog Strongjaw, who is played by Travis Willingham, and he is a Goliath barbarian, generally known for his massive strength and lack of smarts. He comes from a herd of wandering barbarians until one day when he was brutally beaten and left for dead by the herd. The herd had come across an elderly gnome and was going to kill him when Grog's conscience told him that it was wrong to harm such a defenseless person, such as the gnome. He stood up against the herd's wishes and was brutally beaten as a result. The elderly gnome, who happened to be Pike Trickfoot's grandfather, took Grog home to care for him and restore him back to health. Grog lived with them from there on out until they formed into a group with the rest of the group known as the Shits, who would later become what we know as Vox Machina. Pike Trickfoot, played by Ashley Johnson, is a gnome cleric. Pike Trickfoot lived with her grandfather after leaving the rest of their family behind since they were sketchy and unreliable trickster gnomes who relied on crimes and petty theft to get by in the world. Once Grog came along, they became lifelong buddies. Keyleth of the Arashari, played by Marisha Ray, is a half-elf druid. Keyleth lived in Zephyra with her father, along with the people of the Arashari, who are 1/4 of the druid Ashari population, who were tasked with protecting and safeguarding the 4 doorways between the elemental planes and the material plane on their planet of Exandria. She was raised as the next in line for the prestigious title of Voice of the Tempest, a title for all of the head of the Ashari, which was supposed to go to her mother. In order to become the Tempest, a candidate must go through a wandering journey called the Aramente to each of the 4 Ashari planar doorways and succeed in 4 different challenges. Her mother was meant to complete her own Aramente while Keyleth was a child, but never returned from her journey. So Keyleth had to follow in her footsteps to complete the Aramente herself. Pre-stream, Keyleth had completed the Air and Earth Ashari tests, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was preparing for the Fire and Water Ashari tests. So she was about halfway there by the time we jump in. Scanlan Shorthalt, played by Sam Regal, is a gnome bard. Raised by a poor gnome mother who died at the hands of a goblin invasion, Scanlan had been traveling the world for ages as a dashingly handsome, entirely too charming, womanizing bard by the time he came across the rest of the group. He was known for traveling city to city, town to town, and village to village, singing for coin with a band of performers called Dr. Dranzel's Spectacular Traveling Troupe. He generally fucked, performed, and caroused his way through life with a carefree demeanor, although deep down he really craves the love of a fellow gnome. Tiberius Stormwind, played by Orion Akaba, is a dragonborn sorcerer. Tiberius originally hailed from Draconia, the state of dragonborns that floated on suspended chunks of rock using centuries-old technology from the Age of Arcanum in the form of broomstone, I believe, is that what it's called? A highly valuable blue gemstone that possesses levitation capabilities. I think that's the name of it, if I'm remembering correctly. As the son of a rich nobleman, Tiberius was poised to become part of the political nobility of Draconia until he tired of their machinations and their refusal of his more inventive and research-based interests. So he struck out on his own to travel the world and learn as much as possible. Baxeldan, I'm blanking on their last name. Do you remember their last name?
Vessar.
Vessar, thank you. Played by Liam O'Brien, is a half-elf rogue. Vax is the twin of Vex, and they were raised by their humble peasant mother, a human, for most of their childhood in a understated rural village, until they were sent to their rich father, an elf, in the city of Singhorn, a very sophisticated and impressive elven city. As the illegitimate half-elven children of a high-ranking royal ambassador, they were looked down upon and deemed lesser than for not being of pure elven blood. Even though they were given a good education and were very skilled in their respective classes, they were never able to achieve a suitable social standing and left to return to their mother as soon as was possible. Unfortunately, she was killed by a dragon attack while they were away. So they left out onto their own devices. Vexalia, his twin, is played by Laura Bailey, who is also a half-elf ranger. And she also kept a bear companion named Trinket, who she raised as an orphan. While Vax usually kept the cities with his knife skills, Vex kept to the woods, honing her tracking and arrow skills. Percival DeRollo, can you say his entire name? Because that's always the struggle for me.
Percival Frederickstein von Musel Kowalski DeRollo III.
There you go. I
had to think about it, but I did it.
I actually put a ... in my notes because I was like, I know it's a thing, but I'm going to leave that up to the universe. He is played by Taliesin Jaffe, and he is a human gunslinger. Percy grew up as the third of 7 children in a rich noble family who was in charge of Whitestone, a small city-state known for their white stone, which possesses some magical properties. After a couple under the name of the Briarwoods took control of Whitestone and killed his entire family, except for him and one of his sisters, he was forced to leave and was fraught with a whole lot of angst and a deep desire for revenge and retribution. While on his own, he ended up inventing firearms after a dream about a roaring cloud of smoke, and was the first to do so in this particular world. So as such, he is the only known gunslinger on the planet at this time. He joined the group later on when they rescued him from prison in a pre-stream adventure. So prior to the first streamed episode, the group had completed a variety of adventures around the countryside of Taldore, one of the larger continents of Exandria, and they arrive in the large city of Amman after wandering around and gaining some level of notoriety for themselves. They make some allies and discover and thwart some demonic plots against Sovereign Uriel, the ruler of the city, and his family, as well as some sketchiness surrounding General Krieg. I'm not sure what was going on there, but there was something going on there. And he turned out to be a blue dragon in disguise. So they kill and defeat him. They are celebrated as heroes of Amman and have a keep manor built in their honor. Right before the stream, they are approached by their ally, Lady Alora Vysoren, who asks them to travel to Kraghammer, a dwarven mining city, in order to find and rescue her friend, Lady Kima, who has been missing after going on a pilgrimage. On their way there, they encounter some of the barbarians from Grog's past, but manage to continue on their way and enter into Kraghammer. So now, as we open this episode, we are all up to date. It's a huge backstory. I hope that was concise. We are now entering into Kraghammer. So in this enormous underground labyrinth that is Kraghammer, our heroes pursue some threads that tell of some evils deep beneath the mines where they suspect Kima went missing. Is there anything you want to add to the plot of what's going on right now?
I think the only thing that comes to mind is that this isn't the first time they've tried to get into Kraghammer.
Yes.
This is at least the second time, and it's the first time they've been successful, which I think kind of colors some of their adventures as we go along.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that coming up here soon. It's really interesting, their introduction to the city, and I think it foretells a lot of their personalities in a really interesting way as well. So after finding some lodging, drinking some ale, and gathering some intel, that's pretty much where we're at in the story. So are there any allegorical images, stories, or songs or metaphors that showed up for you here?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is they stand out like a sore thumb. Like from word one, they don't belong here. And it's very much a story of being in a place where you are different and you are something wholly outside of the norm, and you have to find a way to make that work in a new situation, and I think that that's a relatable overarching story, and I think that is the biggest allegory that we see for most of this arc.
Totally. I literally wrote in my note, there's a theme of being outsiders here.
Yeah.
Like they had to get special papers from Allura just to enter the city. And then once they get there, they're mildly hazed by the dwarves when they ask around for a place to stay. Like first, Tiberius attempts to communicate in his own unique way with the dwarves since he can't speak the dwarven language, but is given a tongue-in-cheek answer that they can go sleep in the pig pens. And this is where Vex steps in and offers some gold in exchange for the name of a good place to stay. And the dwarf says, "Good to know one of you speaks Dwarven." Like that just sets out the stage right off the bat.
Right. Well, and I think it's super interesting to look at it with the twins' backstory in mind, because it's very different from what they experience from the elves, in that these people are still welcoming, they're still warm, they're just not gonna, immediately be on your side. You have to earn a little bit of trust, which is very different from what the twins especially have experienced in the past.
Yeah, like looks like Vex is the one here who is most adept at paving her way through a potentially hostile situation through the use of coin. And so she is showcasing herself as a worldly traveler here who has learned the implicit language of the streets, which is like the street smarts that both of the twins are coming to here with. Because Vax, on the other hand, charms the dwarves by buying an entire round of ale for the entire bar, which is another implicit language of the streets. Like we're talking about common sense here, which it seems like most of the party seems to be lacking, surprisingly.
At the moment, definitely.
And so they're establishing themselves as the street smart pair of the group, probably due to their experiences in Singhorn and other hostile social environments. And it seems like the members of the group have been on the receiving end of many difficulties, but they seem to be the ones that have taken it the most personally and learned the most from it as well, and how they decide to interact with the world around them.
Yeah, I think it's really shaped the two of them in particular, I think everybody in the party has come across that in some way, shape, or form. You know, whether it's affected them is really the question. And I think it's affected the twins the most.
I actually find that it's particularly interesting to watch Scanlan and his character in this environment too, because on the surface, he's a carefree charmer who only cares about women and having a good time. Like that's his MO, modus operandi. But he actually shows up as the one who keeps everyone on track here, which is an interesting dynamic. Tiberius is seen as interrupting a key conversation with a key dwarf that they're trying to befriend, with Tiberius's very typical blathering self-importance. And Orion, the player, isn't even self-aware enough to know what the aim of the conversation actually is. He wasn't paying attention to that in the first place, which is to get an introduction to the owner of the mine where they think Kima is. But Sam, in the guise of Scanlan, I really think this was Sam at play here, reminds him of the goal, but Orion, in the guise of Tiberius, goes on to continue to pretend that he doesn't know what is going on. So even though he gets that cue from Scanlan, he still pretends or ignores that cue. And then later on in the episode, Scanlan is also seen as reminding them to not kill and harm the same dwarf during a mistaken standoff that was caused by the dwarf misidentifying Trinket the bear as a wild bear foe. It's a really interesting dynamic that's being developed here right in the first episode.
Yeah, I think it does go back to that street smart idea, though. I think Scanlan has a lot of the same skills. He just acts on them very differently. He's more of a supporter. He's more of a behind the scenes. He's pulling the strings without being the one to make the moves. And I think that comes a lot from his experience with Dr. Dranzel and the troupe. Because, you know, traveling bards, not always the most welcome people into town, but if you can change how people feel about you, and if you can pull some of those strings behind the scenes to really change how you're viewed, all of a sudden you're making money instead of getting kicked out of town. And I think that here we see some examples of Scanlan pulling those strings, and it might be Sam. I think a lot of Sam is coming through. But I think it fits with the skills that Scanlan has as a bard that's maybe not always welcome.
Yeah, and like he's the oldest character in the group. And he continually shows his age as the unlikely, arguably laissez-faire father figure of the group, even though we don't really recognize him as that as such. But he continually throughout the campaign has this guiding force despite his outward displays of flippancy. Like he pays so much attention and contributes so much energy to this facade of flippancy, but his actual actions are different from that.
Yeah, and it's very purposeful. Like that, he's doing it on purpose. He's making that choice to be that flippant person.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. And, you know, we certainly see how that plays out over the course of the campaign. I don't want to give any spoilers on that, but I think Sam is making these intentional role play decisions here because he himself is like that as well, like in his own life.
Very true.
He comes off as this charming, devil-may-care lover of the spotlight, but in reality, he is a caring father and loving husband who has a lot of emotional depth behind that huge, blinding smile of his. Really fascinating.
Yeah.
And they all seem to be just basically deeply hurting characters that have been shunned by society in some shape or form, except for Tiberius, who was the one who did the shunning by leaving his cushy political appointments in Draconia. And it is arguable too that Keyleth too wasn't necessarily shunned from her Arashari village, but she was forced into this path of the Tempest, largely against her will, without having any type of personal ambitions for the role's responsibilities. So most of them are entering this world as rejected outsiders who deep down would have mostly preferred to live happily alongside their mothers.
Yeah, I honestly, even Tiberius, like he made the choice to leave, but he lost a lot of his family resources when he did. So he loses that connection by making that choice. And so it really is a whole group of people who don't have someplace to go back to in a lot of ways. Keyleth will eventually, but like she can't go back now.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're looking at a group that's trying to make a way in a place they don't belong with no other options.
Yeah, for sure. So what kind of personal experiences have we had in our own lives that are coming up for us here?
I think for me, I've spent a lot of time traveling just over the course of my life. It's something that I've done forever. But a couple of times it's been just me. Like if I'm traveling alone, I find it a lot harder to find those places that are local, that are key to that place I'm trying to experience. It's a whole lot easier to stick with chains with familiar names and stuff that might look familiar from home. And in a setting like Kraghammer, you don't have a chain to go to. Like there's nothing recognizable about the city. And so I'm thinking a lot about what it takes to navigate a city, whether you're visiting or moving, and how much of a toll that can take on you, especially if you're alone. It's a lot better with a group if you've got the right group. The question is this the right group?
Excellent question. Yeah. I mean, it's reminding me a lot of my own experiences with being an outsider and being rejected in various social scenarios, which I'm sure we've all experienced at some point in time. We're imperfect human beings living in a perfect human world. But that's what makes the misfit underdog stories so appealing over the ages, right? Because we all relate to it in some shape or form. And I was an introverted only child of divorced parents. So I often felt like an outsider throughout my life. And I've always been a little too opinionated, a little too colorful, a little too rebellious, a little too ambitious, a little too free thinking, too smart for my own good, too off the beaten path, which is reflected in a lot of these characters, and very much like Vex and Vax. And at a certain point, I embraced that otherness and actively fed into it and nurtured it. Like, fine, if you're not going to accept me, then I'm not going to accept you either. And I see that type of rebellion in these characters as well. And like, for example, at some point in elementary school, I somehow decided that I wasn't going to like popular movies or books or clothing styles. I was like, nah, that's not going to happen. And like, I actively rejected Harry Potter when it first came out, and even Shrek when it first came out. I was like, no, they're popular. I'm not even going to engage in conversation about them. Like, I refuse to. My dog's chewing on toys in the background. But there was also this time in 6th grade when my elementary school decided to not celebrate Halloween due to pressure from the more religiously conservative parents of the school. And they even banned Halloween costumes at school. And so instead, they decided to throw a harvest dance for the older kids, which seems like a weird, more pagan choice. I don't know why they decided that.
Yeah, I'm not following the logic, but okay.
I was like, okay. But at any rate, my best friend and I decided to surreptitiously rebel and dressed up as goths for Halloween. And we argued that it wasn't a costume choice, it was a lifestyle choice.
Oh, wow. Wow.
We were like, this is a lifestyle. It's not a costume. But we still got punished, despite our brilliant defenses. And I was forced to skip the harvest dance and instead carve pumpkins with the third graders while dressed as a goth, which was a pretty funny situation, I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, now it sounds hilarious. I'm sure at the time it was very frustrating.
Well, I made a stand, I made a gamble, and it just didn't pay off. But there's all these like examples of outsiderness, otherness that we all experience in our own lives. And it's really fascinating to see these behaviors and choices reflected in these characters as well.
Yeah.
So what actions are we being called to take here? What kind of personal actions are we learning through these experiences?
I actually latched onto the very end of the first half where they're trying to resolve what's happening with Trinket.
Yeah.
And the obvious solution would be to just fight, to make that happen in the way that it's expected. And they immediately turn towards something else. They turn towards creative problem solving and towards trying to find a way out of it where, they're keeping the friends they made with those drinks, and they're keeping the goodwill of the bartender, and they're being creative about the problem solving that they need to do in this instance, because a bear is not exactly the easiest thing to hide away. And so I think the thing that I really took out of this was moving towards creative problem solving and creative solutions in situations where maybe I'm uncomfortable, maybe like being that outsider, I need to find a way to come up with connecting to the people around me, or and really be creative about the steps that I take in order to make situations go the way that I hope that they do.
Yeah, I love that. Creative problem solving. That's definitely been an inspiration over the years with Critical Role. Like, you think it's going to lead some way and then they veer, and then you're like, well, it actually worked out pretty well. I'm pretty impressed with how that worked out for them. Yeah, the actions that I'm being called to take are like really reflecting on how I've been hurt and how I've been rejected by other people, and examining how that affects the way that I show up in the world. Like, am I taking the Scanlan route and hiding it with a carefree devil-may-care facade? Or am I taking the Vex and Vax route and charming my way through life with bribes and deals? There's different ways to approach that. And I think both approaches work at times. And I can see also how they can be detrimental at times. So it is reason to lean into that vulnerability and that openness and attempt to heal my wounds and issues with these things that may distort or color my perception of my experiences, to take things less personally, because we're all just wounded children at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all got the mommy issues going on.
I mean, yeah. I think that's a really cool thing to take out of this. Something really interesting to think about.
Yeah. So these are really powerful themes that we've been talking about here. And audience, I call to you too, because we definitely want you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights and stories with us. We'd love to know how Critical Role has impacted you in your own lives, because these types of themes affect all of us. They touch all of us. And I want to give special thanks to Alyssa here for joining me on this episode. It's been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up for today?
I'm just happy to be here, and I love talking about these characters, so I had a lot of fun.
Excellent. Yeah, so next time we'll be discussing the same episode, but part 2. We're going to be dividing each of these podcast episodes into 2, because some of the Critical Role episodes go for 5 hours. So that's a lot to fit into half an hour worth of podcast. So we'll do part 2 next time, and it will be Alyssa again joining with me on that. I'm super excited to dive into it. And as always, I'm looking for more co-hosts and guests. So if you're interested in coming on this podcast and sharing your own perspectives, please reach out to me via email or on Tumblr, and I'll send you the sign-up form. I can't wait to chat with you all. So in the meantime, please comment, like, and subscribe below, and follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Readings CR for all the juicy updates. And until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be happy, and always, always, always remember to love each other. Take care, guys.
Bye.